with no further ado, let's bring in our filmmakers. First, we're going to start with producer, director, and cinematographer of American Factory, Stephen Bognar. The director, writer, and co-producer of The Apollo, Roger Ross Williams. Director and producer of BIKRAM, YOGI, Guru, Predator, Eva Orner. Director and writer of The Cave, Feras, Fayyad. A narrator, director, writer, and producer of Citizen K, Gibney. So many people. Director, writer, and producer of The Kingmaker, Greenfield. The cinematographer, director, and producer of For Sama, Waad, al-Kateab. And then finally, we have the cinematographer, director, editor, and producer of One Child Nation, Nanfu, Wang. Given that the audience may not have been able to see all of these films yet, I'd love to just start out by asking everyone to maybe describe their movie to the audience in a couple of lines. If we can start with you, Stephen, and just go around.
Sure. American Factory is the story of a dead General Motors plant in Ohio, where we live, that comes back to life when a Chinese billionaire buys it and announces jobs are coming back to the Midwest.
Yes. The Apollo is about the Harlem's legendary Apollo Theater, and it covers its 85-year history of black music in America and the people, all the great people who graced that stage.
BIKRAM, Yogi, Guru, Predator is about Bikram Chowdhury, the hot yoga guru. It's about his meteoric rise and scandalous fall.
The Cave is about an hospital underground led by a female doctor battling the sexism and saving lives from the chemical warfare and daily bomb.
Citizen K is about Mikhail Khodorkovsky, a man who was once Russia's richest man, who went toe-to-toe with Putin, found himself in a Siberian prison, and then reinvented himself as an anti-Putin activist.
The Kingmaker is about the former First Lady of the Philippines, Imelda Marcos, and the way she has successfully rewritten history to erase the human rights abuses of martial law, and also their having stolen $5 to $10 billion to mount a comeback to power of her family in the Philippines.
For Sama is 5 years of love, death, and life of family in very bad circumstances in Syria. It's an experience of a female motherhood and the children who lived in that circumstances.
One Child Nation is about China's one-child policy, and the government uses propaganda and violence to control people's body and minds.
So to start out, I wanted to start by asking you all how you decide on the subjects that you tackle and what you need to be certain of before you dive into a film. Do you have multiple ideas going at once and just sort of see which one works out, or what gives you the confidence to move forward with something? You want to start out, Alex?
Okay, well, it's different for every film, and sometimes it's useful to have a journey that you're ready to go on and then discover along the way that you're happy to go on a completely different journey. That's happened to me before, but on this film, after Russia's involvement in the 2016 election, I wanted to do something about Russia, and I was introduced by two UK producers to Mikhail Khodorkovsky, and I went and met with him, and then it seemed to me that his story was so emblematic of how to understand how Russia works. He was at the very top, at the very bottom, where his only power was to end his own life in a hunger strike, and then came out the other side. So it was a way of understanding what's happened in Russia over the last few years, and it seemed to me that if he was willing to spend the time, and he was willing to spend the time without any conditions talking to me, that I could make a film out of that. So I went on the journey.
Got it. So you sort of have to suss out your subject's willingness. What about with you, Stephen? because you had to really get the confidence of your subjects?
You know, I mean, I don't know what everyone else would say, but I find that starting a documentary, you often don't know if it's going to bloom like a flower or not. I like not knowing. I like to just sort of dive into a world and then see what starts cooking. So we've, you know, in the case of this factory, suddenly there's so much hope and excitement, and Chinese engineers and managers are moving to Ohio, and all these blue-collar workers are getting jobs again, and it was immediately like, this is a story, but we had no idea the twists and turns that would come. And I think that's a good thing, because if we try not to predict, you know, the great D.A. Pennebaker always used to say, just immerse, don't preconceive where the story's going to go, just chase it. Be in the room and let the story unfold.
Waad, that seemed to be your approach with just having sort of a camera by your side at all times. When you started filming your family, did you expect that this was going to turn into a movie?
So I've never thought like what I'm filming now will be like lead to a documentary or a film. I was like pretty sure in many places that like I will be killed and everyone around me. So the only thing I've tried to do was just like to keep filming everything, everyone, like every minute, to one point where really some people around me were like, stop, this is too much. But then I felt like in 1 second, like one of the main people who were living around us, he's just being killed in 1 minute. 5 minutes before this, we were just sitting together. And I looked around and say like, I don't know what people really think about this, but this is the life where everyone could be disappear at any second, and also we are facing a very bad propaganda outside by the Russian and Assad regime. So what's happening now, it's so important. It's not for any like particular things to do. So I kept filming for these 5 years, and at every second I'm filming, I feel that this is the last thing I could have done. So when I left, and I was like shocked that now I'm survived, and I have now more than 500 hours, that's when I start like with my fellow director, Edward Watts, who is here, thank you. And we were like, just start to think how we will build this story. And there was like thousands of ideas which we can work on. I followed families for years, people like the hospital where we lived, the story of Aleppo as a city, and a lot of different like elements who were very shining in Aleppo. So during the process, became so clear to me that I need to be part of this story. My family need to be part. And just to give this experience the true life, it need to be really what I've went through and what I felt. And that's why I became like Forsama.
Lauren, you actually were working on another film before this happened, right? Like they were kind of inching, you didn't know which was going to be coming out first.
Oh, you mean with Generation Wealth?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and this story really evolved. I mean, actually both films and also The Queen of Versailles, I had no idea what the film was until at least halfway through. I come from photojournalism, so I'm all about kind of discovering in the field and figuring out what the story is and then moving to adapt to it. In the case of The Kingmaker, I thought I was doing a film that might take 2 years and was about this island of animals where the Marcoses had depopulated the island and brought in of indigenous people and brought in African animals on a boat. And that was my story. And I was drawn to it because I'm usually drawn to stories that have themes and symbolism that relates to materialism and wealth and, in this case, power. But what ended up happening was this election kind of drove me into the present, and the story completely changed. And I ended up, by the end, following dead bodies in the streets of Manila because Duterte was elected and there was a kind of return of dictatorship. So I think I'm drawn to characters and themes that say something about how we live, but I never know what the story is. In fact, I think in a way, because I'm a photographer, I'm not as focused on story. I'm more focused on kind of the visuals and the symbolic ideas, and then hopefully a story emerges.
That seems like it would be a difficult approach to take, maybe like in your situation where 3 cinematographers are in a very difficult and risky situation, and I feel, what was that like to sort of say, once they're in, you're moving ahead with this, or did you not know?
we didn't know actually. I was doing another movie before. This is movie before Last Man in Aleppo. I was doing another movie and then I captured by the Syrian regime for 18 months and torture. I don't know how I survived. When I get out, the Syrian regime used a chemical attack in 2013 and killed in one night 1,500 people, and there is no reaction from any world. And I was documented some of these materials, and then I left to northern of Syria, where countryside of Aleppo and Idlib, where is my family living there. And I continue. I established with me a team of cinematographer in Eastern Ghouta, outskirts of Damascus, and I was working with another team in Idlib and countryside of Aleppo. We film in 7 hospitals, and we've been experienced the bomb, the targeting of the hospital, but also I was shaping this idea. I want to tell the story of the female who trying to change the society, who is the woman who is suffering from injustice situation, coming against the Syrian law, which is didn't give the woman their rights, because my mom is a Kurdish and I have a 7 sister. Some of them kicked off their job because the conservative community around me. And I want to tell the stories of my mother. She didn't get her passport because just she's a Kurdish. And through this, we figure out and find Dr. Amani. She was the first female doctor in the history of Syria to lead a hospital, and we find this is the story can be told in the end of in editing room, because we didn't know actually what we are going to film. So we film a lot of materials and a lot of stories, a lot of following a lot of different characters. But Dr. Amani, she was shaping through a lot of elements that we never experienced, especially as a woman in very conservative society, trying to help another woman, raise the number of the women to be like same the size of the men working in that hospital.
Got it. So you sort of figured out your star or your subject in the process. What about, even, Roger, both of your films have a lot of characters in them. Is it sort of, talk about that process. Do you need to amass a certain number of people willing to talk before you agree to go ahead?
My film's really heavily archive-based, and it's a story that mostly happened in the past, and 60% of the film is actually archive. But we needed the testimonials of a lot of people, and so that was the unknown going into it. I knew the story was compelling, and it was about getting people to trust me and to talk and to share their stories. So that was probably the hardest part, because there was a lot of suspicion in the community because a lot of people had been treated appallingly. And I think the other really interesting thing with this film was I thought I knew what the impact of it would be when I started it. And this is a story about sexual abuse and a predator and rape and assault. And this was pre-Me Too. And shortly after we started the film, Me Too happened. And so, you know, this is a pre-Me Too story coming out in a post-Me Too world. And I thought, and that really changed, I think, the impact and the placement of the film, but it didn't change the storytelling and the structure of the film, but it kind of shifted the meaning of the film while we were making it, which was really interesting, and I hadn't had that experience before.
Roger, your film is, I guess, the only one here that there's like celebrities in it too, which is a whole other bag to convince people to do that, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's its own set of challenges, working with celebrities. So for me, every film is personal, and so the reason why I wanted to do this is because when I was a student at NYU, I would go to the Apollo Amateur Night, and the interaction between the audience and the artist, that sort of call and response, reminded me of the Black church where I grew up, singing in the choir. My father was a minister. And so I had this very personal connection to the place. And yes, there's 85 years, and there's all these celebrities, and there's all this music. It's the story of Black music in America, and how do you tell that in 90 minutes? And so for me, it was really the political aspect of it, that we use music and art to lift ourselves out of oppression, and how we do that, and how we express who we are as Black people from that stage in the arts, And so if I stayed political, from, Billie Holiday singing Strange Fruit, which was a protest song at the time that they wouldn't play on radio stations, all the way to James Brown and his anthem of I'm Black and I'm Proud in 1968, a tumultuous time in America. It was stay political, and of course that's personal to me because I'm a Black man living in America. And so when Ta-Nehisi Coates came along and Between the World and Me, and I think he's the voice of our generation as Black people, that connected it to me in the present and who I am and the situation I'm living in this country.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's as difficult to get someone of that kind of stature to sign on board as it is maybe someone on the street who just sees you with the camera and is like, why should I participate in this? That's maybe for you Nanfu, because you're talking to a lot of people, just in China who've experienced this and have not been on camera before.
Yeah, our film didn't have a celebrity, but it didn't make it easier because it was in China, and most of the people in the film, they still live in China, and they are concerned of the repercussion. And it surprised me that actually it didn't take a lot of convincing for them to be on camera, and even including the officials and midwives who carried out the policy. And they basically admitted the guilt and the killings that they did on camera. And soon I realized as I started talking to them and reach out to them that they all suffered the kind of guilt and trauma for so long, and they had been wanting to talk about it for so long, but no one had approached them and wanted to hear that side of the story. So actually they all opened up. And in fact, as my own family, which some of them I interviewed for the film, that was difficult for me because I've never talked about that kind of deep emotional stuff with my mom, my aunt, my uncle, talking about how they had abandoned their own kid and left them on the street to die, or send them away after 20 days of the kid was born. So all of those interviews became actually more difficult than me interviewing a stranger.
Is there a way to tell if someone's going to be an intriguing interview subject? Like, how do you suss that out?
I mean, Imelda was a crazy, interesting interview subject, but I think the challenge is that with a public figure like that, she has her shtick. And it's like, how do you show, first of all, that she's not telling the truth, but second of all, how she's trying to manipulate it was like she was a great storyteller, and for me as a storyteller, I'm also trying to get the story behind the story. And so I ended up using a lot of the kind of nonverbal communication in the interview and like treating the interview also as verite, whether it's the looks or, the way she art directs, like moving the gold sheep as a prop or getting her makeup done or the interaction with her servants and the subtext of those moments. And then also in the edit, using other people who are more credible to kind of provide relief to what turned out to be her lies.
Yeah, there's a big difference between doing an interview on audio and doing it with a camera. And in some ways, it's a huge disadvantage to do it with a camera because there's a lot more apparatus. It's a lot more of an artificial moment. At the same time, though, the camera betrays certain things that what is being said does not necessarily betray. And that's one of the interesting things. That's why, while I'm interested in having a transcript of the interviews that I shoot, it's not as valuable as seeing them because a lot is revealed in the face that is not revealed by the answer itself. And I think that everybody has a different approach to conducting an interview, but I see even conducting an interview is probably the wrong word because I feel very strongly about having a conversation. I think most people want to tell their stories, and the trick is, if it's a trick, is just to convince them that you're really interested in hearing what their real story is and will, be respectful. That is, and that said, there comes a time with an Imelda Marcos and even with a powerful person like Mikhail Hodorkovsky where you may not be getting the truth. In fact, you're fairly certain you're not getting the truth. And then you have to figure out how to reckon with that. But in the moment, It's a kind of, what was it that Roger Ebert called it? The camera becomes a kind of empathy machine.
I saw some of you shaking your head to that. You agree?
Well, I was curious, do you feel, in terms of a person's energy, so they sit down, they agree to be interviewed by you for X number of an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. How do you, I just want to ask my mentors here, how do you guide the energy of a person, and do you feel the peak coming, or do people run out of gas sooner than you think they will, or?
Well, I mean, first, it depends if you're interviewing a celebrity. That's a very different interview. They're going to come there so sort of prepared to, sort of perpetuate whatever their celebrity image is, and you try to get around that, but that's not always possible, especially with when they're talking about something like the Apollo. But with real people, not celebrities, for me, that was the best stuff that I got in the film, because the audience members, there is an arc to sort of getting them comfortable, ramping them up, and then as filmmakers, when that moment you're like, oh, that's it, that's gold, I got it. Like it peaks, and then their energy, starts to flow down. And or you can have the other sort of technique is to kind of wear them down. There's people who do like 6-hour interviews, and they're worn down, and then they'll be like, whatever, I'll say whatever.
That's like a reality TV tactic.
I think speaking of long interviews, this film was the longest interviews I'd ever done, and with the victims of sex crimes and rape who had been wronged and hadn't gotten justice in this film, they wanted to talk. And I really felt like, sometimes when it's, these people, I had to be they were fragile, and I felt I couldn't ever curtail them or interrupt them. And so the interviews were incredibly long, but it was just valuable to let them speak, because that's when the moments happened. But it was long, and I remember the days, we'd scheduled maybe 2 interviews in a day, and we were barely making it, and I wasn't used to that. And also with the edits, I'd said to my editors, I was a little bit almost apologetic, like, there's a lot, but I promise you it's good. And when they watched it, they were like, oh, thank God you didn't interrupt them, because you would have lost them. They would have gone back into their shells. So I feel like sometimes you just got to let them go.
Want to interrupt them? Did you feel like?
I mean, I wanted to be like, there were things that I knew I wouldn't use, and I wanted to be able to say, could we just go back to this, or could we skip ahead to that? But I just felt like if I did that, they would be gone.
Did you feel that, Nanfu? Because you're talking about similar, like, sensitive subject matter.
Yeah. Totally. I think, like, we were talking about the interview process, and I was just thinking it's so much like the documentary process itself, because it's so unknown, unpredictable. And I feel like, especially for One Child Nation, a lot of people we couldn't do pre-interview. We just went in and talked to them. And sometimes this is the very first meeting we have to do that interview. And it's so unpredictable, you don't know what this person's personality is like. So the first 2 questions, you are getting a sense, okay, this is a person, you ask a question, he would talk for 40 minutes, and you have to gently interrupt. And this is another person, you ask a question, and she answers for 2 words. And when that happens, like trying to gauge how am I gonna get the story, the most story, or the answers that I'm curious about. Is this person resisting, or is she, like silent, or is too traumatic? It's always like trying to navigate that. And I do feel a lot of people sometimes in One Child Nation, because they were talking about the loss of their child or the loss of their family member. So there was a lot of trauma that they didn't even realize until the moment that they were talking about it, which is the first time in decades that they first talked to somebody. And for me, I think something that helped was I was doing the interview during my pregnancy, and sometimes it's the first year of my son's life. So either I was carrying an infant in my arms when I did the interview, or they can visibly see that I was a very pregnant woman. So that, I think, brought a lot of empathy between us. There were a lot of things that didn't have to explain, that it was understood between us.
Sometimes it can be kind of like a therapy session. I remember interviewing somebody. It was a long and sort of exhausting interview, and then there was when we were done, there was kind of this long pause, and then he looked up and said, "So, same time next week?"
I find that too, that it's kind of like therapy. It's like peeling back the onion, and sometimes what people say, it's like what's behind what they say. And so then they say something, and then you're just kind of quiet, and then what's behind it, and then they really just want to get to the root of it. And even with somebody famous like Imelda Marcos, she'll just drop these bombs that you just can't believe she just said, but it's like you just wait, and then it just comes out.
But people are gauging, do I trust you? Are you going to be there for me if I really go there? And I felt that in BIKRAM and One Child Nation a lot, that people are taking leaps of courage with you, but it's up to you to create that space or that lifeline or whatever you want to call it. And it's fragile. It's so fragile, I find.
As you guys are talking about this, I'm thinking about Waad and Feras, your films, which are a bit more cinema verite. Did a lot of this process happen after the fact? Like, I was wondering so many times, did you have to get permission from the people coming into the hospitals? Or, how were you asking them to appear on camera?
So actually, I'm aware. I'm coming from film background, and I'm aware about the power of the cinema verite, and I love the cinema verite, and I feel it's not just about observing as an artist what's going on in front of you, but also like kind of allow you to studying the behavior in the middle of the change that's happening in front of me, to my country, to the people that I love, to the people that I care about them. In case of Dr. Amani and other doctor, we documented with them. Especially Dr. Amani, she was a clever person, and she's well educated, and she's caring about, she has a lot of responsibility around her. She's fighting and battling the society, and it was like the conversation with her about like, there's a two rule. One rules, we should not touching the bodies because we don't know what's kind of the weapon that used over the victims. The second rules, like we should not come across and stop her from doing what she do. And that was in Eastern Ghouta and Idlib, the post of the location that she worked on. But she want to know more. When I like filming like a lot of moment with her, like about the conversation with the male who all the time bombing her or stoning her from behind the camera, and I start like to figure out and understand more that it's like completely like it's represent the idea or the culture of stoning, throwing the women because they saw the woman that less than them not manage to do that the work that they think that they can do it. And I feel what she up against it, she's like raising a lot of question about existential question, like about who's on the body of the woman. One of this is question she was like powerfully said in front of many of the woman, why you bringing the children in the middle of this war? And there was like so many fight inside the hospital, like with a woman that you bringing these children and let me and she take care about these things. And I was like in full of responsibility. If I use a lot of this footage, will be like raised against her a lot of hate and anger from the society and could kill her. But one of this line that was beautifully said when she said like, I don't know how these people bringing children in the middle of the war, and one of the man jumped, God forgive you for this scene. And that was like establishing the whole story about what Dr. Amani tried to do. There's what try like to make it, and that was like the leading of what we want to tell in this story. Not just about the war and the bombing of the hospital, which is we documented around 1,000 hours of documentation for bombing of hospital, conversation between Russian pilots, conversation between Syrian pilots attacking the hospital, but also about gender inequality inside most humanitarian places where the victims trying to use their victimized in front of the people that they help them.
Before the revolution, before 2011, in Syria, like we've never used like to use cameras, or when we see the camera, it means like this is just like the government or the power, the authority, which we were really scary of this. And then like suddenly 2011, like it's opened a lot of like conversation on the ground. And suddenly you can see, like in east part of Aleppo, in 2013, like January, we had one meeting for all the citizen journalists and the journalists who are living in Aleppo, the city and the district. And we were like 121 cameras, like person can use the camera in very different level of professionality, but all of them can be like going around in the city and filming a lot of things. And in that meeting, I was like so shy because I was the only female among of all these people. So I felt like this is so hard to start like taking the cameras out and speak with the people. But like suddenly you feel like, so interesting what Nanfu mentioned, because when they've seen you as like a female, it could be in many places like more access to the people, more access to the woman, more access to a lot of feeling which like usually people can't really speak it out. In one of the scenes in the film, like there was in the middle of a chaos in the hospital where there's a lot of casualties coming, and most of them like just you see like blood and people like just dying. And I was filming, I've seen like a kid which is like maybe 6 months or something. And at that time I was pregnant with my daughter, and I was filming I walked to this child, and suddenly I've heard like the sound of the mother like shouting, "Are you filming?" And literally I felt that she doesn't want that. So I've turned the camera down and I wanted like to turn it off or just walk. And she like shout again, like, "Film me, let the whole world see this, why they've done this to us." And she continued like explaining a lot of things. And you've just like feel in this moment when the whole world outside doesn't know what's happening, while like this woman, she just lost her child now. And she was like begging me to continue filming. And like, maybe if there was like a man behind the camera, it will be the same. People have seen that this lens is the whole world watching them. And they want to speak about this because for us, like, struggle to live and fight for keeping alive. It's, for us, this camera or this footage was everything. And in many places in the film, I left my daughter upstairs to get down to film. And I knew that in any minute, any of these, like, say, like so quick goodbye could be the end one. But I wasn't really like caring about this as much as I'm caring. I want to capture all of this because at any second, all of us will be like not here again. And the only thing will stay is this footage and these stories. And I think in many places around the world, people really want to speak. And they will not just be like happy of what they will speak about, but they want to see this. They want to see the impact of that work, the justice which brings just from this, like saving history and saving the life.
Some of the topics you've tackled have been addressed in podcasts. You've had that too, Alex. And books. Sometimes you guys are adapting from subject matter there. So why the documentary form? Like, what do you think that this medium can bring to a topic that maybe a podcast, a book, even a television show cannot?
I think with BIKRAM, we were already in production when I heard that there was a 4-part ESPN podcast coming out about BIKRAM. And this happens all the time. When something is in the zeitgeist, it happens all the time. Alex, I'm sure you remember when we were doing Taxi, there was another film, and we were worried at the time. But when they come out, they're usually quite different, the films. And honestly, I feel like the films all find their way. The podcast came out when we were in production, and of course I listened to it the first day it came out, and I was completely not concerned. Even though it was 4 hours and our film is only 86 minutes, I think, and it's great and it's valid and it's been well received and well listened to, I think the thing that made me the most relaxed was that, this is such a visual story. BIKRAM, for those of you who are familiar with him, he's got a very strong style and look, and watching, it was cult-like, and it was about a brainwashing kind of situation. And when you see teacher training, which is where a lot of the abuse happened, you see these photos and this imagery of hundreds of people doing the same postures, all scantily clad, and this guru at the front of the room on a platform, on a throne, and everyone's sweating and kind of dying in this hot yoga environment, and he has his own personal air conditioning funneled onto him. And I think when you see that, it's so gobsmacking, And when you hear it in a podcast, it's still amazing and fantastic. But I felt like, oh, we have this other, it's a visual story in my head. So I always feel like there's room for multiple stories, and it happens a lot. And, it's just the way of the world, I think.
I think you described my photo, Eva, and I'm so honored to have it in there.
Your photo. Oh my gosh, I always think this is the best thing, Laura. Well, you did a whole series with BIKRAM, and we licensed some of her imagery, and it was such a treat.
Describe the images, please, because they are.
Well, he's in a little
Speedo
type thing, and he's sweating bullets, right? I mean, you described it, and he's got a microphone, and he's at the top, and then everybody is sweating like crazy, and then he goes around and in very suggestive kind of, touches people and gets them into their pose. I mean, not in a sexual way, but there is a creepiness about it that I think makes it easy to imagine the content.
And also, what's so interesting about this situation is I never got to meet him, but you did. And so when I saw you recently at a function, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe, tell me about the day you spent with him, because, he won't do interviews now because he's a fugitive. And I think his lawyers have basically said never ever speak to the press again, because he just digs the grave. And you've seen the film, so you know
Sure.
how bad he is. But so he wouldn't talk to me despite trying a lot. But when I saw you recently, I was just like, oh God, tell me about your day with him. I'm so
Well, technically, everybody and our cameras were just sweating so much. Like, it's really hard to shoot in 110 degrees. You're fogging up and you're, sweating bullets. And
our cinematographers who shot in the BIKRAM studios, because we had to shoot some of the yoga. I mean, first we had to work out how to get the lenses not fogging up. And we had a problem in India because of the humidity. But honestly, when I think back to our two cinematographers who were carrying rigs and cameras and gear in 110 degrees for 90 minutes, twice in one day for 2 days. I mean, I think they both lost about 10 pounds over the 2 days, but it was tough. It was a tough environment.
Best diet plan documentary crew.
Exactly.
Yeah. Has it become, I mean, Stephen, you've been in this business for a while. Has it become easier from your perspective to finance documentaries? Because I know there's been a lot of talk, especially in the past, 2 to 5 years, of the popularity of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a different world than, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it was PBS and HBO, and those seemed to be the only two places to go. Probably weren't, but it seemed like those were the two places. And now there is, you can go to the IFP in New York, or I'm sure there's an equivalent here in LA, with a reel, like a sample clip and a pitch, and do spotlight on docs. And, with American Factory, when we finally took it out on Front Street, we'd been filming for a year and a half, and we had a 6-minute clip, and we had meetings with CNN, POV, HBO, Netflix, Amazon. I mean, it's just, the list goes on, Hulu. It's a different landscape now, because everyone, and certainly with other players getting into the jump into the fray right now, it's a different landscape. Everybody is aware that documentaries are vital cinema, and that the the barn doors are busted open in terms of form, in terms of how stories are told. The fact that you can create ravishingly powerful images with, cameras that we can afford, it's an amazing time.
Right, and go ahead.
Oh, and I was just going to say, and the audience has just grown so much. It's just extraordinary to me how many people watch documentaries now and have seen so many people's work, and that's so fantastic, I think, for us.
I mean, last year there was, I think, 4 documentaries that grossed over $10 million, which was one of the most unprecedented years at the box office for nonfiction film. This year has been strong as well, but I do feel like, a lot of your movies are coming out on streaming platforms, obviously yours, Stephen, HBO for you, Roger, and it does feel like documentaries are something people have gravitated to more in their home, ultimately. Do you agree with that? Why do you think that might be, if so, Roger?
People want the truth. We're all struggling to say, what the hell is going on with the world? And why are things so bad? And I feel like documentaries can be like, oh, here's why. You watch Citizen K and you're like, oh, it condenses 20 years of Russian history in an incredibly articulate, compact form. And I understand this Putin phenomenon now better than ever because I saw that. The power of the Apollo, I mean, that film leaves you on the floor and you realize it's like from Billie Holiday on, these are resistance fighters. These are not just great artists. They're freedom fighters. And I mean, this is what a documentary can do that like Twitter can't.
Stephen's right, as our country now seems like we're living in a bad reality show, and the documentaries are like the only thing to ground us now. And I'll get into like an Uber, and they'll say, "What do you do?" I say, "I make I love documentaries." How many of us have been in Ubers where the Uber driver's like, "I love documentaries." Everyone are watching documentaries now, and that's so great. And that's because of all the streamers and everything. But also now the studios are interested in documentaries, and they all of a sudden now the studios are knocking on our door, and they're like, "We want to get in the game," and that's exciting on a whole other level. So it's great.
Yeah. And also documentaries save lives. Gain respect for the people. In our case, in the cave, following Dr. Amani and many female, the people was around those women. They wasn't respect the women and try like to be aggressive, go to homes, stay homes. With the Dr. Amani case, the people start to feel like, oh, this is dangerous. We should like behave in front of the camera. As well, when you get the film out, survive, you make the people, your subjects survive, because you also make your history survive and testimony in your political situation, and you don't allow the winner to write the history, which is the dictatorship. And we are up against the Russian propaganda and the Syrian regime propaganda, who is try all the time to confuse the truth in Syria and make it so complicated, and the people say like, well, we don't know if this is truth or not truth, if this is happening or this is not happening. I've been meeting a lot of people coming out of my film say like, oh, it's fiction film. So like, what? How you can say fiction film? I take it like in a cinematic way, say like, okay, Godard say the best documentary is a fiction, the best fiction is a documentary. So, but generally, because there is a lack of empathy from the politicians, our mission as an artist is to gain this empathy through the arts. The art is gaining the empathy. It's just when we understand the empathy, then the power of documentary came in front of us.
Yeah. I think there's something else that's interesting, and it really goes to the talent of all the people on this floor, and that is the ability of documentaries to present a complex reality. There's so much about political propaganda that is about thumbs up, thumbs down, person in white hat, person in black hat, to simplify and oversimplify for propagandistic purposes. In a time like that, the documentary is so powerful and important because they present a complex reality, sometimes by reckoning with real life that can't be controlled, but through the voice and eyes of artists who are trying to understand and interpret that reality. And so that the images in a documentary are not facts. It's not just the facts, ma'am, as Jack Webb said. It's not like the phone book. Those are facts. It's a complex reality that can only be understood by watching images and the intellectual power that comes from appreciating those images in a way that can't be boiled down to some kind of simple black and white answer. And I think that's what people are hungering for. Stories that tell people what life is really like, which is not so simple, but it's compelling, and it's emotionally vibrant, and it's intellectually stimulating, and yes, and sometimes it saves lives, sometimes it challenges people, sometimes it changes policies, all these things, or sometimes it doesn't do that, sometimes it just makes you think, but they really grapple. Documentaries, I think, are appealing because, like great drama, it invests in the complexity of human life.
I think also right now everything is moving so fast, and all of the news organizations are just going for these daily deadlines, and what we do is really, really, really slow journalism. Like, my film took 5 years, a lot of these films took many years. Roger's films covers more than 80 years. Alex is the history of Russia. Like, we do slow journalism, and that offers a perspective and a historical perspective and an interpretive, analytical perspective that you can't get when you're chasing an hourly deadline, which is what almost all the news organizations are doing now.
Right. I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking about, like, of course, I'm interested in this. It's my job, and I go out and I try to evangelize and tell people about your movies. And a lot of times, it's a hard sell for people to see movies that deal with difficult images, like the kinds we see in your films. I'm looking at you, Waad, and Nanfu at the end. Are you thinking about that? Like people don't want to spend their free time grappling with the reality of the world, and how do you change their mind about that?
This was one of the open questions which we started in the first of the process and still with us to the end. We were all the time just trying to find the line where people can watch to the end, but at the same time give them the reality of this. And I felt that was something of the most challenging things. When I was inside Aleppo, watching everything happening, and I was sending some photos for the news, and then they come back to me and say no, we can't put this because this is so hard for people to watch. But for me it was I'm seeing this in my life. There's many people here watching this, and not putting this is not solved the problem. I know people when they watching this kind of things, they are eating or thinking, or they don't want to see the reality of this, but this is truth. This is happening. And for world to make more change in this world, people need to see this as it is really. And in my film, we literally, what we used in the whole film was less than 10% of the reality, the truth of these bodies who've been being killed through the years. And I was just one camera. So imagine about the other people who were in other hospitals or in other cities or whatever, having the same experience exactly. So we were I have that responsibility to show the people the reality of this, but at the same time trying to give them a breath during the film. And we've struggled a lot with this. And we had one screening, 2/3 of the process. And people who show them the film, they were no, this is too much. And we come back, we tried again and again, and every time we felt we're getting to the point where it could be fine. And because Edward with me, which he is from Western background, and he can see what people like you can see from these circumstances. And for me, I was the person who was inside, so we were trying to judge this many times. And we felt second and third time, and then the fourth time was good. And the first screening which we had, I was so terrifying about how many people will leave because of this shocking images. But for me, I was I literally want how many people to watch it as much as I can. But at the same time, I need the story to be really presenting the situation. I don't want to protect it as much as people want to see. And I was truly shocked that so far, we've been maybe we've reached the 1,000 screening around the world now. And maybe what we left exactly was 6 people who left in different screening. And for me was yeah, people need to see this, and people really want to ask more about beyond what they've seen in these shocking images. And unfortunately, this is our reality, which is we need to be more strong to present it.
Yeah, absolutely. My co-director actually was watching your film in the cave at Doc NYC, and she told me afterwards, she was at some point, I almost wanted to leave because how brutal and hard it is. And then I asked myself if this was somebody's reality, why I couldn't even bear to watch it if this is somebody who's living this life. So it made her actually asking herself those questions. And I think that's the power of those images and showing it to people. In our film too, there was one scene that we got so much feedback during the making of it. People say, you can't show this, it's dead babies who were killed. But it was never a question of me whether to keep it or not, because it's actually the evidence of our history. And if I censored it, on the behalf of the government or for the interests of the government, then I'm just like my government. And I do think that no one who lives in current world can escape not seeing any graphic or brutal images. It's in the news, it's in TV every day, all the time. Kids see that all the time too. But I think what documentary does is it's not showing just that one picture, is showing what's behind it, the full story, the humanity behind it. And one of the discussions that we had for our film is not showing the horror of the death, but it's reminding people the precious of life and the fragility of life, and to show us the beauty and the warmth that life could have.
And I found your characters so compelling, like you being in the story, your love story, you being in the story, Dr. Amani. It was like the characters that made it so it wasn't hard to watch. It brought you through. And I mean, with Imelda, I often use a lot of black comedy, and in a way, kind of sensational tropes to get you in, and then deliver a harder reality, but maybe you're not expecting that when you start.
But also, all this is filmed coming up against the governments and numb politicians who want to hide this truth. And the people really want to see that. I mean, 1, 2 people were left, 3 people. Before, there's no people watching documentaries. We're now, like, with many screening of these films, it's make a lot of people aware for their future, for their political situation, for their right, for freedom of expression, for the future of democracy. This is what the missions and the people understand and aware. The people are smart, clever. It's not like say like the audience don't accept it. No, the audience accept it. We try it, and we keep trying it, and we will keep trying it. This is how it's gonna change.
Yeah, it's about keep trying. I'm thinking of keeping trying, Eva. With in your film, you have a lot of footage of sort of news interviews of when the survivors of BIKRAM came forward, like Dateline, very prominent shows, and still so many people don't even know what he's been accused of. Was part of you telling this story like, I'm, again, putting this out there and you guys need to know what's happening?
I think part of the problem was the full story had never been told. It happened incrementally, and so the people that knew about the story maybe knew, and I was a little like this when I came to it, he did something bad, didn't he? But also what really surprised me was actually when we had our first meeting with Netflix after we were in production, I just assumed everyone knew the story, everyone young, everyone in LA. It's a yoga town, it's a health town. And a lot of like the people who worked at Netflix who were quite young said to me, we didn't know the story. And that kind of gave me a lot more hope that it would be bigger than we thought. We live in a bubble in LA. You go outside, most people don't know this story. And also when I went to BIKRAM yoga studios and hot yoga studios that were not affiliated anymore with BIKRAM, and I was doing classes because I had to obviously understand the yoga, understand the community, and also work out how to shoot it. I would also ask people after the classes if they knew much about BIKRAM, and most of them didn't. Some of them did, but a lot of them didn't. And I just thought, I think we often assume people know more than they know, but it's very much that 24-hour news cycle where somebody's seen something and how much can you really remember? And I think with the Syrian films, that's a great example. You watch these movies and you learn so much more than you would ever be presented anywhere else. And it's the same with Alex's film. People keep alluding to the history of Russia, and we sort of laugh about that. But my God, how do you do that in 2 hours? There's so much to these films, and so I think that's the value. And you just can't assume that people know things. People are exposed to a lot, but not a lot stays, I think.
We were talking about earlier the changes in the business, and a lot of you have come into film festivals with partners, streaming partners, television partners now, as opposed to going into the festivals looking for distribution. Roger, can you talk about the difference in sort of that experience of seeking distribution versus going in like with it in hand?
Yeah, well, there's the old documentary model of getting grants. Writing grants and that grind, and you get little increments of money. You'll get $15,000, you'll get $20,000, but your budget's hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you have to change the grant each time to fit whoever you're applying to. And that, but if you can make it through, if you have the stamina and to do that, then and you take the film to. And you luckily you get into a top tier festival like Sundance, and you take it there, and it's just on the market. That's both terrifying and exciting because the rewards are great, but it's also a great risk. And if it doesn't sell, you're screwed in a way. And how are people going to see your film? So now, a lot of the films now with You know, the streamers are, you know, they're just scooping up the films before they even get to the festivals. I mean, there's still a market at the festivals, obviously, and they're still buying stuff. And there's, you know, so for me, with like investors, they want to sell it right away and just like, so they want their money back. Right. So they don't want to take, you know, they're not necessarily want to take that risk. I want to premiere it at a festival and put it in the marketplace, and that way I can sort of control more of what's going to happen with the film, and you know, if there's outreach and engagement, if whoever's going to distribute it, if they're going to invest in that, which is really important with a lot of my films. So I would like more, you know, more control. That's a better, for me, it's a better model. I don't know.
I've found that filmmakers have more authority or power than sometimes we think we do when it comes to this. Like, so we were lucky to partner with Participant Media on American Factory, and we were lucky, very lucky, to get into Sundance. When we got to Sundance, we were fortunate there was interest in the film, and we started having meetings. And for my partner Julia Reichert, who's not here, you know, impact and engagement has been part of her journey as a filmmaker for decades. I mean, since the beginning, 50 years ago. And we wanted to find a partner who really got that, you know, and we were and you know, you're hearing pitches where it's like, oh, we'll get it into X number of theaters, or we'll do this, or we'll do that, and that's all great, but how could the film reach community audiences and engage on the questions that we hope the film raises? And when we heard like Netflix, for example, we think of Netflix as a massive streamer all over the world, but Netflix also has this whole program where you can do community downloads. Anyone can download a Netflix film. So Ava DuVernay's great film 13th was downloaded 1,000 times. They had 1,000 community screenings over the course of like 2 years in church basements, union halls, schools. As long as you're not charging admission, you can do organizing with a film. And that's like, for us, that was like, okay, that is really significant.
You know what else Netflix has, though? Connections to the Obamas. Which
we did not know that.
Can you
when we walked into the room with them, we did not know that.
Everyone, I'm sure, wants to know, though, like how they got on board. That's super cool for them to endorse the movie.
So we're very fortunate that Higher Ground Productions, the company created by President and Mrs. Obama, to create films, documentaries, fiction, you know, TV shows, TV series. They have teamed up with Netflix, and when we were at Sundance, we walked into the Netflix meeting, and a bunch of people introduced themselves, including Priya Swaminathan and Tonya Davis, and they said, well, we're the heads of Higher Ground Productions. And me and Julia said, what's that? And, you know, anyway, we were very lucky. The President and the First Lady really liked our movie, and they said, we want to make this the first release of Higher Ground, and you know, we said, oh, that's pretty. Yeah, I mean, we couldn't really talk after that. So it's all, yeah.
I want to say, like, in National Geographic, that was the first foreign language film National Geographic come in board. They never do that. They came in the productions, and they work with that, and they feel proudly that they do with the experience. And also, the film is like not the style of National Geographic film. It's more serious film. It's not about like
animals.
Something. Yeah, I mean, really, like it's not about. And all of this is normally National look for that, and you see like National they taking the risk, really take a big risk. You know, this film could rise like a big hate campaign against National because Russian campaign, and because me also as a filmmaker who's like been and target for similar campaign. So it's like big risk for them. But even with that, they said this is important truth. We have to stand behind this and fight for this film. And this is great. This is also for me as a Syrian. Yeah. It's historical because they save the history of my country.
I wanted to ask you about. I mean, you're alluding to your controversial, I guess, past. Here, across the street, you were not allowed to come to the Oscars for your last film, and you were the first Syrian filmmaker to be nominated for an Oscar, right? So can you talk about this film? Obviously, we're about to enter awards season. What do you think is going to happen this time around, and how did that experience affect sort of your thought about all of this?
Yeah, my visa will finish like in a couple of days, and I have to go out and have one entry visa, and I stuck here. You know, they didn't allow me to come to do the sound designing in US. So I do it in board, and it was very, very sad and very make me like real angry and feel injustice situation as for me as a filmmaker. And also I didn't get the visa for UK. So I have like also shooting in UK and fixing image in UK. So I sit in front of me and I feel like I'm not able to travel to the country that I want to do my movie and continue finishing my movie. I don't know. I'm waiting the situation now if I will get back or not. I could stack, and if it doesn't happen, I will move on for my next film. This is what's gonna do. It was like last year. It was horrible because not just me, the subject of the film, the cinematographer also. Normally the Academy just support if you are nominated, then they try to support you. But we was like trying to push the Academy to support the cinematographer also to come in, and we came in the last couple of days before the award season, and was like a big solidarity from the industry and from the people, from everyone. Roger, who was like one of the great people who stand behind us here, and that many people, John Churchill, she was like fighting in every, we don't have a budget for the film, $500 in the film. I sleep in the street. So all this is people. John give me her house. Roger like invite me a couple of times. So it was great. But because this is what's make the documentaries important, because you feel the real solidarities and people want to fight for the truth. And this is back the question before, people want to see and important for them because this is what changed their lives. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the governor of the doc branch of the Academy. And so what's great about the documentary branch is that we're a community and we rally around the filmmaker. And Joan she like brought everyone together and really was passionate about talking to the Academy members about, the Academy has power in the world, and it was a great sort of effort to try to get you in the country. And it's happened now. Orwa, the head of the IDFA, was also denied a visa to come, and this is the largest documentary film festival in the world in Amsterdam, and he was not allowed to come and give a keynote speech in the U.S. because he's Syrian, because of his visa. And that's outrageous. That's outrageous to us, and it's up to us as a community to really fight this and make calls and use the power that we have to change that.
They save our life. Really, I mean, like coming to here, being with our films in the Oscar, it's something important. It's not just maybe for a lot of people, it's a lot of people who don't know the Academy well, they think it's a fame, but for us it's like a space to speak about the freedom of expressions, to call for like stopping the war in Syria, to save lives of our people who are killing in front of us. Now I'm sitting here, my family who is now in Idlib, they are under bomb and under attack, and I don't know about their lives tomorrow or after tomorrow will die. Like my sister who I grow up with them, who raised me, they are also like could be killed in every single moment. This is a great risk. This is where we here in the Academy and this is panels, we are open like to talk about this is a great risk and make like save our lives. Really, like for us we are banned by Donald Trump's, we banned by all of these different politicians, but the Academy give us the voice to speak out, to make some change in our country.
We're lucky you're here today. Yeah. You're talking
Can I
about.
add,
Oh, sorry.
because we had the same conversation outside with Eva about like just being here, like we are maybe the luckiest people who can be like here. So imagine how many films and people who are trying to do films, they just want to like be here or like come to here. And this is really like not about just the risk and the suffering that we are trying to do to be here, but also like how many opportunity could be like sitting like with us here, or different films, which is in different places I went to in the like Arab world or in Europe. There's a great films which maybe no one of here can hear about these films because of this visas issues and this access to be like here. So really we need to find a way. I don't know how this works with this like world which is just getting crazy and everywhere. But there's thousands of opportunity out of here, and they want to be here, or they could deserve this more than all of us here, but they don't have that opportunity. So this is really something so important, and we need really to shed the light about this.
Waad, obviously for your film, as you were talking about, your family was in danger. Same for your team, Feras. Obviously, Alex, you've done films where, in the movie you talk about people in Russia in London disappearing from Russian government, and you've done movies about Scientology.
In Alex's situation, he's in risk everywhere around the world because his film with the Russian. So it's all the time. Yes.
Yeah. So how do you all factor the personal risk you're taking in filmmaking?
Compared to some of my colleagues here, I mean, the risk that I've taken is pretty minimal.
But you've been like followed and stuff.
Yeah, I get followed, but
whatever.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that if you're, the key thing about risk is understanding the nature of it, and then taking the risks that are prudent to take in the moment. I mean, there are risks, but there are rewards, and the reward, as Feras says, is getting the story out. That's what makes the risk worth it. And it's silly to take crazy risks, but it's important to take some risk, because without that risk, you don't get the story out, and then misdeeds go unpunished, abuses of power go unregarded. It's important. So, but it's also important to take a stock of where you're at and how you're there, so that you don't end up on the wrong side of events if you possibly can avoid it. Everybody on this panel is taking great risks, and particularly for our Syrian colleagues. That's enormous risk, where bombs are falling every day, and you never know when the roof is going to cave in. And I think that's a kind of heroism that I'm in awe of.
And there's legal risk too, right? I mean.
Yes.
Yeah.
And legal risks are ones that you can be prepared to take. I mean, that's something I would be willing to talk about. I mean, when you're going after abuses of power, it's important to make sure that you're prepared for the legal challenges that are going to come after you. And the best way of doing that is to make sure that what you're doing is airtight. You've spoken with lawyers, but you also have a plan for how to counterattack. And that's where and in terms of making films, that's why it's important often to be careful about the kind of partners you get into business with. Some partners are better than others. And that's why I ask, particularly with controversial topics at the very beginning of a process, are you prepared to go on this ride? And and I will say, for example, in the case of Going Clear in the Church of Scientology, there were lawyers at the litigation department at HBO who had already been toe-to-toe with the Church of Scientology as part of the Time Warner lawsuit. And they were not only prepared, they were anxious. They were eager for possible repercussions once they looked at the film and it was there. But it's terribly important, because I've also been in business with people who weren't prepared to take those risks. And then suddenly the lawyers, it's all about CYA. It's not about telling truth to power. It's about how power...
CYA?
Cover your ass.
Oh. Abbreviation, gang.
It's about speaking power to truth. And that's not a good position to be in. So, I think good advice to filmmakers when, again, going back to Stephen's remarks about who do you get into business with and why, you want to make sure when you're getting into business with somebody that they appreciate what you're doing, understand the risks, and are going to support you and have your back. Because I've seen it both ways, and it's worth asking the questions.
I know a little bit about lawsuits, too. With the Queen of Versailles, I had a crazy lawsuit, but I would say I totally agree with Alex.
By the husband of your subject.
By the husband of my subject, who sued myself and Sundance for something that was in the blurb, which he didn't realize was actually his own quote. So it was completely baseless, but we do live in a world where when you're speaking truth to power, and we see it with our president, the legal system is a way to suppress speech. And the way that works is when the journalists and the filmmakers can't afford to defend their side, even if they're on the right side. And so that's why, like Alex says, it's so important to have a company that stands behind you, but also it's very important to have your E&O insurance way in advance, certainly before festival and even before announcement of festival.
Well, no, I would argue, I mean, if we're getting technical here, for those of you who don't know, E&O is called errors and omissions insurance, but it's what protects you. And it's very important to have, on some projects, if you can afford it, and if you're looking down the road and you know that you're in danger of being sued, you know, you have it at the beginning. And I never used to do that, but I do it now. Because if you have it at the beginning, then you protect yourself against the eventuality of somebody threatening to sue you. And if they threaten to sue you along the way and you don't already have it, then you have to disclose that threat to the insurance company. And the person who's threatened you may be excluded from your E&O policy. So if you really want protection, you get the insurance up front so that you're protected.
I'm sorry for this, but this is in my situation and some other situation, this is unrealistic at all. Like, just maybe 1 week ago, someone who was like dropped from his balcony in Istanbul by, we don't know, while the Russian were...
The backup who was James Limassou, who was established the White Helmet organization.
So someone was killed or in very like unclear way, and no one knows what is it. And that could happen, like, unfortunately, with any one of us, with you, with anyone who's related to any of these authorities, which they don't care, even if they was so like announced very clearly that, oh, we did it and no one can do this. The Russian and Assad regime is bombing whole cities, killing like thousands of people every like month to 2 months, and it's just like happening and no one really care about this. So we are dealing with very clear threatened, but also we are dealing with a lot of, we don't know when is it will happen. And all of us like could be that target. But the main thing about it, which is I really agree with what you started with, it's really worth it. We are doing things which we knew it's really worth our life. And for 5 years where I was filming for Sama, I knew that this is could be, and I accept that. And now after like the film, the most terrifying moment for me was during the 2 years of doing the film, because I was like so scary about being attacked in any minute and the film is not out. And really the day when the film was out, I was like, I don't care. And so far, I don't care, but they are trying to do this to make us silent and to make us think that you don't need this, your life or what you are doing is worth, like not worth what you are trying to do. And what they did with James, which is just like 1 week ago, just to remind us that, look, you could be, any one of you could be that person. And they will keep doing this to keep us make like stop. But what we need to do is, obvious, every one of us here saying this, and a lot of other filmmakers around the world, like, this can't happen.
She just gave me the wrap it up signal, but do we have time for like a couple questions if people want to ask from the audience? Yeah? I just wanted to give you guys an opportunity since right there, go ahead.
Hi, this question's for Nanfu and for any one of you that are dealing with topics of repressive regimes. I'm curious what has happened to some of the interviewees in the aftermath of the doc. When you're making your doc, who is it that you ultimately want to watch it?
So far, the Chinese government haven't reached out or contacted anybody who is in the film. And for people who have seen the film, you would notice that there are only 4 people: a journalist who is in exile in Hong Kong, an artist who chose to speak up all the time in Beijing, and 2 people in Utah. They are the only 4 people in the film that openly criticize the policy, and the rest of the people, including the officials and my family members, they revealed a lot of pain, conflict, questioning, but in the end, all of them said the policy was great and necessary. So nothing they said was subversive in a way. So that kind of helped me also feel a little bit comfortable to have them all in the film in a way, because none of them said nothing was illegal, subversive. The second question, who I wanted to see the film most is always Chinese people. And the reason was, for me, that I only left China until I was 26, and that was the beginning of my political awakening, the beginning of me realizing what my country and my government really was. And I realized most of my friends, my generation, the majority of Chinese people, they live in a place where information was censored. And I hope the films I made would help them see the reality a little bit better. But I realized the only way that could get people see the film in China is for the film to have enough exposure outside of China. If it's reported in the spotlight, in the news, then eventually people who study, who work outside of China would watch it and then tell their families and friends in China. And that's what had happened with the films that I had done. So One Child Nation was released on Amazon on November 8th. The next day it was pirated in China, downloaded thousands of times. And then suddenly it went viral on social media and people were talking about it, reviewing, and I think that was the only way that you could get a film seen in China.
Yes, I would echo that. Apparently, my film, which I did not expect to find distribution in Russia, now has wide distribution in Russia.
In last minute in Aleppo, I did short film called One Day in Aleppo. I make it like metaphoric to tell the story of Aleppo, because last minute Aleppo it's banned in all the Arab countries and banned because it criticizes the system of Arab countries, but also like the situation I did a short film like 24 minutes. I was producer for that, and we screened in St. Petersburg, and there was like make a lot of noise and bring the people to watch Last Minute in Aleppo in this way. But answering the first question, three of my subjects captured by the Syrian regime. One of them is in the jail because he was testimony. He was first witness on the chemical attack. The two other being taped on the videos to say that what we did is a fake news, is like a Hollywood movie, and we pay them like money to say what they say, and we smuggle them out. We help them like to come out of to safe place, which is like the nurse and. If you saw the film, two of the subject from the director, yes.
I'm wondering if you could discuss the writing process.
I think that in a way the writing is the opposite of how you would write in the fiction film, in the sense that you shoot it first and then write from the material you have. And so in this film and in Generation Wealth and in Queen of Versailles, unlike my first film, Thin, which was kind of all verite, and I would not call that writing, the interviews, I make transcripts, and then I work with the structure first, but then there is a point where I do write it from the transcripts too. And in this case, I was working with an editor who wasn't really word-based. He was more scene-based and verite-based, and I was more word-based, and so we kind of complemented each other in that way, where he would work on scenes and we would kind of work on the overall structure, but in the end there needed to be very precise words to kind of tell the story. So it's hard to kind of explain because it's very organic, but the writing is a combination of the editing, the scenes, and the actual words, which in this case were very interview-based. But I think that the story, the narrative, is very much like a fiction structure with a kind of first act, second act, third act. And in the case of the Kingmaker, it's parts of it are chronological and parts of it are not chronological and go kind of between history and present. And we tried to not give information to the audience before they needed it, like not front load the backstory or not tell the whole history, but to really keep it in the character and the narrative development and give that information as it was needed.
The script is written at the end, not the beginning. But I don't really like to do, when I started out, I was a big believer in the idea of having a plan and sticking rigorously to the plan. And to Steve's point earlier, I now think that's a terrible idea. You know, it's the way to make a really bad film, because at the end of the day, what's most powerful are the images, and you have to figure out a structure that engages the power of the images that you've got, not one which predetermines them. And that's the hardest part, is coming to terms with a kind of a structure that allows for you to use the best material. And sometimes you know, great material is on the cutting room floor. It has to, because as the film gets closer to completion, the film begins to speak to you and almost demand that you know, make certain decisions, because there's a certain soul or character to the film. But I don't like using transcripts anymore, except toward the end of the process, because if you use transcripts, then you're just looking at the written word. You're not looking at how it's said, what the person looks like when they're saying it, or you know, in a transcript, you know, in a verite moments don't tell you much of anything. You need to reckon with the materials and then find a structure. Finding the structure is everything. Once you find the structure, then everything, then you hone the structure, or I hone the structure until everything folds in on itself like a narrative fiction. But until that point, it's chaos.
I forgot one thing, which is that I also transcribe the cut of the movie as I'm going. So it's not so much just working from the transcriptions, but it's also transcribing the movie, like with the verite scenes. And so if I have, like, let's say it's a 3-hour cut, I find looking on paper, I can start to like edit down, and it really is in that editing, and even in the like last month, like the last 15 minutes that you're taking out, that you like really find the film. And so I continually transcribe as I'm working through the edit.
One of our great consulting editors, Nathaniel Dorsky, years ago said, filmmakers must shift our allegiance from the material to the film. Because at some point you're making a movie out of your material, but it's no longer about any love or any strength of any specific material, painful as that is.
In the case of The Cave, we did like something called time behavior, time event, and that's what's lead the story to the final visions, because we was watching and see how the behavior of the character belonging to that. We didn't think about the first act and second and third act, because we want to like do more like an experience, make the people leave, feel, and connect, and that where the story built itself without even putting like any structure in front of us in the wall.
Thank you so much for coming here and sharing your thoughtful answers. I know 8 filmmakers is a lot, but thank you all for participating, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.